To style the separate items, I'll again create a separate component and I'll name it meal item.js. Name, as always, is totally up to you. And in there, you know the game, we create a React component by importing React. We'll also probably need view, text, and style sheet, and maybe also some other things from React Native. Then we set up the component, meal item, where we receive props and where we then return some JSX in the end, set up a style sheet here, stored in a styles constant with style sheet create, to which we pass our object. And in the end, we export our meal item here as the file default. Now with that here in meal item, in this component, we of course need to return some JSX code for that meal item. And that's something I get from the category meal screen. There I have this view with my text in here. That's in the end what I want to output. A bit more complex than that. But I'll cut it from there and move it over to meal item and there return this view here. But of course, we're not done with that. For one, this also should be touchable because we can select a meal. We can select such a recipe to be taken to the detail screen. So I'll import touchable opacity. Now, of course, you could again make that differentiation and use the ripple effect with touchable native feedback on Android if you wanted to. I'll go with touchable opacity for now and wrap my view here with touchable opacity like this so that we can actually tap our item here. And on press, I actually want to trigger a function that I expect to get on a property, which we're not passing into the meal item yet, because we're not using the meal item yet anywhere, but which I will pass in the future. Maybe we name this onSelectMeal or just onSelect, whatever you want. I'll name it onSelectMeal, and I expect to get that prop on the meal item when we then use it in JSX. So that's the touchable opacity. In there, I have my view with the title. And actually, that view should be a bit more complex than that. I want to have a view, a nested view in there, like this, and another view below that. So I want to have two rows. This will be set up as a column, but these two views here will be set up as rows here. The first view should also render a background image so that the title sits in front of this background image. The second view, the second row here, should render some details about the selected recipe, like its complexity and duration. So let's start with that before we later add the image. On both these views, I will therefore add the style property and point at styles meal row, or whatever you want to name this, because it will be a row in my meal presentation here. And I'll add meal row down there, therefore, and set the flex direction here to row, of course, because, well, that should be rows of data. Now, around the overall item here, I'll wrap another view where I want to set up a general style of styles meal item. And meal item then also is configured here in the style sheet, of course. And there I want to give each meal a height of 200, let's say, each item in the list here, and a width of 100% to take the full available width, and also maybe a background color of this grayish look here. We can see whether we want to keep that. For now, I'll use that. Now we can use the meal item here, and we're not done with it yet, but we can start using it here in the category meals screen by, of course, importing it. Import meal item from the components folder and there from the meal item file, and then render this here. So return meal item here like this. And of course, we now need to pass in some data. Data like the title, which we get from itemData.item.title. And the onSelect prop, which I expect to get in the meal item, which we in the end hook up to touchable opacities on press prop. onSelectMeal, that was the name I chose. That's also something we need to set up here when we use the meal item. And this should point at a function which for now doesn't do anything, but which will later load the detail page for that meal. So now we get the title on the title prop, hence in meal item. Here, when we output the title, we do this with the help of props. title. If we now save this, we should actually be able to see something here. So let's wait for this to reload. And yeah, we see our meal here. Certainly not too beautiful, but at least we see a bit more than before. Now, what I'd like to have here is a little bit of spacing around the list, but inside of the spacing, the list items should take the full available width and not just the width of the widest item, which is currently what's happening. And for that, we can go to the flat list and there add the style property and set this width to 100% to make sure that the flat list itself takes all the width it can get, width that we should have the look we want here. Now, of course, the meal items are not done though. They don't look the way I want them to look, though we also slowly get there. Now, in the meal item.js file, we still have some work left to do though. For example, this view here with the title will later also hold the image. And therefore, this should be way bigger than the row below it, which will later just output some details. Hence here, I will merge my meal row styles with another style object. So with the style set up in another style sheet object, which I'll name meal header or whatever you want to name it. And the same down there, by the way, for the details in the end. There, I will merge this with styles meal detail so that we have combined styles. And let's start with the meal header, which we can set up here. The meal header in the end will hold the image and also the title. And I want the height of this to be, let's say, 80% of the available height. So this should be very, very large. The meal details automatically will therefore get the remaining 20%, obviously. And to see whether that works, let's output some details here. So in that view here, in that row below our title row, I also want to have some text here. And there I'll output, let's say, props duration, and then M thereafter for minutes, because duration will be a number, which we treat as minutes. We just need to pass in the duration from the category meals screen, of course. So when we use the meal item, besides passing in the title, I'll set a duration prop because we're now expecting this on a meal item. We get this from item.data.item, which is our meal, and there we'll have a duration property because our meals, as defined in the model here, do have a duration property. And indeed, if you have a look at the dummy data, this here is your duration, which is fed in. If we save this, now we see our duration down there. And actually, we can still change that height here to even 90%. Should be higher than it was. Yeah, that looks better. And of course, you can experiment with this as well. In the meal detail row, I now also want to have some horizontal padding, so left and right of, let's say, 10. And justify my content here with space between. Keep in mind it's a row, so this will justify it horizontally so that when we have multiple items, they will be nicely distributed there. So we have 20 minutes. Let's output more information there by adding another text. And there output the complexity. So here I'll output complexity. And thereafter I'll output the affordability. Now we just need to pass in that data as well when creating our meal item. So here, besides duration, we pass in complexity, which we get here, item data item, complexity, and affordability. That's, of course, item data.item.affordability, like that. And if we save this and let this re-render, now we see this output here. Still not super beautiful, and we can definitely enhance this, but a nice start. Now, simple and affordable, or our complexity and affordability, therefore, that should be styled a bit differently. We know it will be text, and therefore I can use some JavaScript functions or methods we have available on strings. I will simply use to uppercase to convert it to uppercase entirely, like this. And now this should already look a bit nicer than before. Now, you can still tweak the styling here. I'll go with this styling here for now. And let's now add a background image above. So for this, we want to have a background image behind this title text. And thankfully, React Native makes adding such a background image really, really simple. React Native ships with a built-in component, the image background component, which we can use to, well, render an image in the background, as you would imagine by the name. You add it next to the component behind which you want to add it, and you add it before that component. So here I add image background. And on image background, like on a normal image, you set a source. Here, my source is a web image, so we pass in an object. If it would be a local image, you would use require and what you learned about local images earlier in the course. But here it's a web image, so we pass an object with a URI prop, and there we use props image, which is where I expect to get that URL in this component. So of course we'll have to make sure we pass in the URL on that prop. I'll also add some styling here, and that will be styles.bgimage, which we now can add to the style sheet down there, wherever you want. Maybe here, doesn't really matter. An important thing here, you have to set width and height because it's an image from the web, and I will use 100% for both because it should fill the entire space it gets. Now we just have to make sure we pass in that image prop here in category meals screen. So besides the title, here I also want to pass in item data.item.image URL is the name of it. You can see that in the model, image URL. So that's what we're passing in. And we pass this to the image prop because that's what we're expecting and what we're setting here in the meal item. And if you now save that, and let's mix things up and test this on Android, just takes a bit longer to load, which is why I typically use iOS here. But now if we test this, we see our burger here. What we don't see anymore is our title though. To show the title again, make sure that you actually wrap image background around it. This is how you tell React Native which content should be inside above that background image. So now with that, here's our title. Not that easy to read, and we'll fix that, but it's there again. So we're getting started with that recipe here. Now let's make sure the title is a bit easier to see by giving it a style here, styles title, which we can now set up down there. And I want to set a font family of Open Sans Bold. Makes sense since we registered this font. Give it a font size, which we increase a little bit, maybe 22. You can play around with that, of course. Give it a color of white to make it a bit easier to read, and also assign a background color so that we can always see it, even if the background image would be white, in which case white text would be hard to read, by giving this a RGBA color, which is a color that has built-in transparency, so to say. And this is simply a black color, which is a bit transparent. And now also add a little bit of padding here. Padding vertical of 5 should look good, so that the background colored box here doesn't sit right on the edges of the text that's inside of the box. And padding horizontal of 12 maybe. With that, we should always see our title. And actually, we can probably decrease that transparency here. Increase the transparency, decrease the opacity. Yeah, that looks a bit nicer, I think. Like this. And the only thing I want to do now is I want to move that title down at the bottom of this image. And therefore on the BG image style, which I have here, I'll set justify content to flex end, because the background image automatically acts as a flexbox, so to say, like a view. So we can justify our content in there. And now we have that title at the bottom. We could now also center the text by going to the title here and adding text align center. And in case it's too long, too big, besides, of course, shrinking the font size, which I'll do a little bit to 20, of course, you can go to that text here where you output a title and set number of lines to 1. And this will ensure that the text is automatically shortened if it's too large. Like here, for the salad with cherry tomatoes. We also see a strange effect here on iOS where we have some extra background behind our text and not just the background colored box here. That's because I applied my background color and so on effect directly on the text. To fix this, we can cut it from the title here and only set up the color and so on there, and instead add a title container here where we add this background color and so on and wrap this container around our title. So an extra view we add here, and it's quite normal in React Native to nest multiple such views. And on that view, we can now add style, styles, title, container. And if we save that, we should get rid of that strange behavior on iOS. Yeah, now we don't have that extra box there. Instead, we just have one background color, and the same on Android. So now this doesn't look too bad, but I'm not entirely happy. I'd like to center my details here vertically as well and give it a little bit more space, I guess. For that, we can give the header maybe 85% of the height. And on the meal detail here, keep in mind that our flex direction is row because we're merging meal row and meal detail here. And therefore, our cross-axis is top to bottom. So if we want to center vertically, that is the cross-axis on which we need to center. So here we can set align items, which does the cross-axis positioning, to center. And also change our color here a little bit to a little bit of a nicer color. This very light gray, F5, F5, F5 might look a bit better. Yeah, it definitely does. Now, to make sure that we do really center vertically, we just need to be more explicit about the height our meal details should take. We take 85% on the header, so on the detail here, we can set a height of 15%, obviously, to take the rest. Yeah, and I'd say this looks quite decent here. Certainly list items with which we can work here. I'll now just add a little bit of a border radius because, you know, I like border radiuses. So I'll add a border radius of 10 here so that we have some rounded corners. And with that, if you go back, we're almost there, but you'll notice that the image actually doesn't respect the border radius. Now to fix that, on the meal item, we just have to say overflow hidden so that no child item can go outside of this space or this shape we're building here. And with that, that's a start, something we can work with. Now, of course, we want to make sure that when we tap such an item, we actually go to the detail page.